This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Cass Midgley.
We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, you can support us monetarily in 2 easy ways. You can pledge
$1 million
or more through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast, or leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated.
I think one of the reasons that Christianity survives is it has this like self-defensive kind of virus-like theology, where it's like all of your struggles are just a sign that, you know, God's teaching you something. So you can ignore a lot of your problems because it's God's lesson or it's God's plan for you to be going through this hard time.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 209 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. I'm going to die. A big thanks to each and every one of our Patreon and PayPal supporters. Today, my guest is Devin Andre Woodard. Devin is a young professional living and working in Austin, Texas. Devin is a passionate man who, after being burnt out of spending years pouring his entire being into Christian fundamentalism, is attempting to discover the freedom that comes from embracing life as it is and making the most of the time we're given. Before we get into my talk with Devin, you've probably received a pop-up warning on your computer or your phone saying you've been infected with a virus. Click here to have it removed. But if you do click it, you will get the virus. Just this week, my son got a call from Apple tech support telling him that his phone had been hacked and that all the phones in his family plan would soon be hacked, accessing all their personal info, passwords, and use their friends list to invade all their friends' info. He panicked. He naively fell for it and proceeded to do whatever the person on the phone told him to do, including download an app on Daddy's desktop computer, which almost completed the hack for which they were warning against. It reminded me of Trump's weak, lazy, cowardly, insecure tactic of warning people about fake news, when in fact, every time he opens his mouth, it's fake news. An accusation is made against someone that is not true of the accused, but is true of the accuser. There's a quote attributed to Joseph Goebbels that says, quote, "Accuse the other side of that which you are guilty," unquote. And although there's no proof that Goebbels ever said it, it's a common tactic throughout history. Sometimes from ignorance and pure survival mode of insecure bullies, other times in full knowledge of its genius. As weak as the accuser may be, this tactic is not weak. It is highly powerful in wreaking destruction and creates a vicious vortex that entraps any victims who fall prey to it. How does one fall prey to it? If the accused gets defensive and says, "No, I'm not," they play right into the hand of the accuser. As in this 10-year-old scene from a SNL Weekend Update episode where Amy Poehler subtly accuses Seth Meyers of having a small penis. Immediately after she jabs him with this joke, she holds her hand up for a high five and says, "Up top?" Listen to Seth's reaction.
The owner of the Icelandic Phallological Museum, which offers visitors a close-up look at male reproductive organs of several species, says that 4 men have promised to donate their penises after their deaths. You know, I'm thinking I might do that.
Really? I didn't know they had a miniatures collection. Up top.
Why would I high-five you on that? Why would I do that?
Because if you get mad, it looks like it's true.
Up top!
Here we go. Boom!
Funny joke, funny joke.
So it's a trap to fight against the accusation, but it's also a trap to agree with the accuser. When we agree with the accuser, we can fall into the trap of shame and even look to our accuser for a solution, like my son did with the fraudulent Apple tech support guy. Either way, Too much attention is given to the accuser. The best thing is just to hang up, because both the accuser and the accused can become what they hate. You know the phrase, "it takes one to know one"? This is a phrase of empathy, which can be good, but even empathy has its pitfalls. Many say that compassion is better because, in the metaphor of someone falling in a pit, empathy gets down in the pit and both are now worse off, whereas compassion throws the fallen a rope. Now, in this age of Jordan Peterson mania, that sounds like something he would say, and I believe he did, and so I just threw up a little bit in my mouth, but as with all truth, sometimes you find it in places that make it hard to swallow. When we hate our enemies, we are apt to swing wide in the opposite direction and merely mirror the poor emotional health of our enemy. But consider a modification of that adage, "it takes one to know one." It takes one to hate one. How much of my own intolerances are a result of my dislike of my own weaknesses or past weaknesses in any particular area? Often my impatience manifests when I feel ignored or invisible. Where else in my life have I felt ignored or invisible and am tired of it? So when it appears in traffic, often I see everyone as trying to block my progress or ignore me, or being insensitive or even thoughtless. At the same time, they're probably driving slow in the fast lane because they're compensating for years of having no power or voice and have been oppressed by others, and this moment of power on the interstate feels good to them, whether they know why or not. So our lifelong developed pathologies are clashing on I-24. And if we hate or resent certain people, it's often because we either see their actions reflecting back to us what we don't like about ourselves, or the opposite. We're not like them at all, and thus don't relate to their weaknesses, and thus can feel superior and judge them, thereby hating them and thereby becoming like them. Judgment of others and ourselves keeps all of us in this fucking cyclical pit of stupidity and immorality. Take the shanty call center of scam hackers calling my son, for example. They're trying to get rich, and they can justify it because they resent other rich people. They may never admit to this, but the thinking is they're crooked, so we're justified in being crooked too. Victims often become victimizers. And this is all about people acting, behaving, thinking in reaction to others, only mirroring their adversaries as opposed to acting, behaving, and thinking from one's own core. To stay above the fray of insecure bullies and accusers and jealousy and resentment, to avoid such traps and swirling eddies that pull us into that muck and mire. We can and should assess and evaluate our circumstances and relationships all day long without falling into the trap of judgment. Blame, no matter where it lands, never helps the situation. Honestly, keep in mind that every fucking human being on this planet is fighting the same battles with their history, their abuse, their shortcomings and insufficiencies, and most will never have the wherewithal or self-awareness to understand what's happening to them in real time. But you can. Listeners of the EA podcast have such a huge advantage over the rest of the unevolved world because those people are losers and we are winners. And if they only knew as much or had as much knowledge as we do, they too could be cool and healthy as us. They probably don't even read books or go to therapy. It must really suck to be them. Oh wait, I've become what I hate. Ground me, William Shakespeare. Suspicion always haunts the guilty mind. What? Say that again. Suspicion always haunts the guilty mind. So seeing myself as guilty, as bad or evil, I'm more prone to be suspicious of everyone else? Something like that. And by lifting myself out of guilt, by giving myself a break, by giving myself the grace and forgiveness that I would give my own loved ones, I'm helping to alleviate my own suspicions and the suspicious lens through which I see others. When I assume that people driving slow in the fast lane, or people that overgroom their fancy lawns, or people that scam little old ladies out of their money, or people that are ignorantly afraid of people different than them, when I assume that they are bad people, I'm letting my suspicion stifle what might otherwise be curiosity. Like, why do they act that way? Why do they care about their goddamn lawn? Why are they afraid of others? Why are they xenophobic? And why do I care? Hell, even apathy would be healthier than suspicion. I don't care why that other person's being a dick is no less moral than I wonder why that person's being a dick. One is slightly more mature than the other and requires more energy, but both would keep me out of the vortex of becoming what I hate. As long as I don't let myself feel too superior to their assholery, because I certainly display my own share of it in other contexts. It's kind of live and let live with just a tad more care than that, but not much. At the end of the day, it's saying yes to what is. This place, this planet, this human race is majorly fucked up, and I don't help it get well by responding in ways that are either the same type fucked up or the opposite type fucked up. I'm still adding to the fucked upness of this planet when I react in kind. Nietzsche wrote, quote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, a love, a fate, that one wants nothing to be different, not in the future, not in the past. Not just to tolerate what is reality, much less hide from it, for all idealism is just dishonesty in the face of what is, but to love it. I want more and more to learn to see what is the reality of things as beautiful. Then I will be one who helps make things beautiful. Amor fati, let that be my love henceforth. I do not want to wage war against what is ugly. I do not want to accuse. I do not even want to accuse those who accuse. Looking away shall be the only thing I say no to. And all in all, and on the whole, someday I wish only to be a yes-sayer." Unquote. Now, Nietzsche was a white, straight European male in the early 20th century, so he may be afforded privileges that allow him to apply and practice that more thoroughly than others, but it is at least a virtue and a value to which to aspire. Hatred is the easiest of emotions to invoke. Love requires self-awareness and intention. At minimal, we would do well to select our enemies carefully, for more often than not, we become like them. Thus, if our enemies are people, those people will often define us. If we're not defined from without, we will be defined from within. My hunch is that we humans kind of need enemies, and we'll create them if that role is vacant. So I suspect that the enemy is within all of us and thus can have the uniting effect of a common enemy, and yet an enemy that we not emulate. My tattoo defines my enemies as fear, pity, resentment, victimhood, and insecurity. If we'd all resist these enemies within, without an ounce of shame for having them, we might be able to laugh and drink and eat and cry together with those we formerly identified as enemies. That's a tall order, but I've got a short life. In summary, somebody's got to take the high road. There are two paths of weakness, small creativity, and short-sightedness. One accuses others of the same behavior the accuser is doing, and the second judges others for the same behavior the judge ends up reflecting. Both are afraid, as we all are. The high road is refusing to let fear evoke a reaction we will later regret. So we need to just close the false virus pop-up, hang up on the scamming caller, journalists ignore our baby president, and keep reporting the news. Stop judging ourselves and thus others who reflect back to us what we don't like about ourselves and don't like about them. Live with a clear conscience so we'll be less suspicious of others. And don't take ourselves or the size of our penis too seriously. We taped this conversation on June 9th, 2018. Our intro music is by Dave Weckl called Just Groove Me. The segue music on this episode is Ghost 2 by Corey Kilgannon, a favorite of my guest, Devin Andre Woodard. Morning.
Morning, sir. How's it going?
It's good. How are you?
Doing pretty good.
So, remind me where you're calling from.
I'm calling from Austin, Texas.
Cool. That's a great town.
Yeah, I love it out here. It's probably the best place in Texas to be.
Absolutely. How long you been there?
I've been here since 2012. I moved here from San Antonio to go to UT Austin.
Okay.
I graduated in 2015, so I've been just working for the past couple of years now.
What are you doing?
I work as a tech coordinator for a student engagement platform called Orca TV.
Huh.
The short of it is we essentially created a portal that gathers all the content students are making on campus, and we manage, curate, and distribute it. So it was a startup that got acquired by a bigger company called Apogee, and I got put on that team 2 years ago. And my job is essentially to take all of our tech processes and make them more scalable, right? So when you have a startup, you basically do everything cheap and free, and it's kind of hodgepodge. And a lot of my projects have been, how can we make this look more like an actual business and easy to teach?
Yeah. And so that means, did you do it in 4 years or 3 years?
I was 3.5-ish.
Yeah,
so
that's fast.
I graduated. Yeah, I graduated a semester early by some clerical error.
Clerical error?
Yeah, I just managed to, take a couple online classes stacked on top of my normal course load.
Get credit for that.
Yep.
And how old are you?
23.
23. You got any siblings?
I've got an older sister. She's 28, 4 kids, married, and then a younger brother who's 18 and just graduating high school.
Okay, so you're the middle child. We'll keep that in mind.
That's where all the problems are going to start.
Well, typically you're a peacemaker, I don't know. And your parents still alive and together?
Yep, still alive and well. They're living in San Antonio. My dad works for USAA as a sort of product developer, and my mom is a COO for a nonprofit. So they're both doing really well and just enjoying life.
Wow. Well, so far, you got a great life.
We'll get into the not so great parts as the conversation goes on.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, things are pretty good right now, all things considered.
Yeah, just as a good background. I mean, this is
yes, absolutely.
So let's go back to before I go, San Antonio's Anthony Magnabosco's Street Epistemology, I think, is based out of there. Have you ever heard of that?
I have. I did. I watched an episode of The Atheist Experience, I think, that he was co-hosting.
Yeah,
I believe.
Good guy.
Yeah.
He's been on this show, and then I've seen him speak before. He just seems like a sweetheart.
Yeah, he's a real nice guy. It was really helpful to see him when I first deconverted, because it kind of helped me calm down a little bit with anti-Christianity.
Right? He's a really chill guy, and his approach is very civil and logical, and he's got a lot of respect for the people he talks to on the street. I really appreciate his approach.
Yeah.
So, let's go back to San Antonio, and what's the religious context of your upbringing?
So I guess I'll go back a little even before that.
Okay,
so I was actually born in St. Louis, Missouri. My initial religious context was a small Baptist church that me and my family attended. Mm-hmm. Very small. It was an all-black church. I felt very at home there. Mm-hmm. And as a kid, I was best friends with the pastor's son, memorizing Bible verses and stuff. So that's where I was introduced to just Christian doctrine, would have said that I was a believer and saved. And then around 8 is when we moved to San Antonio. My dad got a job out there. So the whole family came down with, and that is the first time that I guess the religious bit got difficult for me, in the sense that my parents were doing a lot of church hopping, trying to find a new place for us to go as a family. And the racial dynamic was just a lot different than St. Louis. Yeah. So we were going to a lot of all white or mostly white mega churches. And you go from a small all black church to that. They never found a place that felt like home. And in that process, I kind of just gave up on church as a kid. You know, I didn't understand why we were going to all these different places. So I kind of put it on the shelf for a while. Fast forward a couple years in, they finally find a place to settle down. Interestingly enough, it's actually a church where I met Nathan Keith, who's been on the show before.
Oh, yeah.
So Harvest is where my family's going. And at that point, I don't remember exactly what fed into it, but I essentially didn't believe, and I wasn't interested in church. My parents were just kind of making me go. They were always getting on me to get involved. And I got involved in the youth group where I met Nathan and a bunch of other people. And
what year would that be?
That was, so I remember it was 8th grade. So around like 2008 is when I started having to go regularly.
Wow.
I didn't actually become a active member of the youth group until about 2010 or so.
Yeah.
So there was and Nathan will tell you, there was a solid 2 years where I was just this like edgy kid sitting in the corner, not talking to anybody. And, you know, they were really great people. You know, they would always reach out to me and sit by me and, you know, try to get to know me. And just after a while, some other things going on in my life, I decided to, quote, give my life to Jesus again. Mm-hmm. And that's when I became a really passionate believer from there.
You're radical.
Yep. Too radical.
Yeah, a little too radical. Well, yeah, any degree of radicalness towards this is much ado about nothing in hindsight.
Yeah.
So just real quickly, going back to your parents, do they both have college educations?
Yes, they do.
Okay, so around your house, I mean, were you praying over meals? Were they how devout, or how much was Jesus involved in your home life?
So it's interesting. It actually was, they were very devout, and he was very involved when I was young. And it actually got less and less as I got older, even when I became a believer in high school. So as a kid, it was always, Bible studies together, praying together every night before bed, praying over every meal, going to every extra church thing. And then when I became a believer in high school, they were still in the background. I didn't realize at this time, still having a hard time really plugging into a church. Yeah. There was a lot of just,
frustration on their part, probably.
Yes.
So you're ramping up and they're kind of ramping down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we actually butt heads over that for several years.
Okay.
Because I was becoming this hyper conservative, everything's got to be about God or it's a waste of time type believer. And they were kind of growing out of it and really just trying to relax and enjoy life a bit. And I'm like, no, you need to be, giving all your money and all your time. And
yeah. Well, the thing about hardcore Christianity is that, the Bible says, love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength.
Right.
So it's an all thing. And the hot or cold, Revelation chapter 3, if you're lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth. And then the third one that I think that comes to mind as far as devotion is Jesus said that if you confess me before men, I'll confess you before my Father. If you deny me before men, I'll deny you before my Father. So if you weren't proud of Jesus, out and proud, and you weren't all in, and you weren't hot or cold, then you were a pussy Christian, and probably God was disappointed in you. And if you wanted to be a man after God's own heart, and here am I, send me, and get called, and see signs and wonders, and be an active ambassador of Christ sent into the world to make the world a better place. I mean, it can be almost like the military or something to where you say, I'm a part of something bigger than myself.
Right. And that fed into my personality a lot. I have most people who know me well tell you I have like a very extreme personality. And when I get passionate about something,
go big or go home.
Exactly. So yeah, that was definitely the context family wise. And my sister and brother were more on the same lines as my mom and dad in terms of, everyone says they believe, but nobody was as intense about it as me between high school and college. And I got labeled as very self-righteous, which looking back, definitely
they were right.
See where they're coming. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm looking at your picture here, and you've got a great body. I mean, were you when I say no pain, no gain, or all in or all out, or go big or go home, or you work out?
Yep, it's pretty much all I do these days without the need to go to church anymore.
It's the one big discipline in your life.
Yeah, I think I played football in middle school and the beginning of high school. And I just enjoyed getting really strong. I was never very good at football, but I did like lifting weights and impressing people. So I always kept that habit.
So you hit the gym how many days a week?
I'll do weightlifting 4 to 5 days a week. And then I train jujitsu pretty much every day at this point.
Okay. Do compete jujitsu or?
I'm ramping up to competition. So I had my first in-house tournament with my gym a couple weeks ago, and I placed 3rd there. Okay. Which was pretty exciting. So I think the next round of competitions that come up, I'm probably going to head out there, see what I can do.
Now, I've been surprised that there was almost a movement maybe 10 or 15 years ago where, and I think it had to do with like the Wild at Heart or the Promise Keepers movement, but there was a time when Christians were tired of Christianity being kind of a feminine thing, that women run the church and women do all the stuff, and that where's the men? Well, they're home watching football, and that, that's, so there was this surge of manhood, and one of the ways that manifested is all these karate training shops and storefronts popped up, and they were owned by Christians.
Yeah, it was, I remember I got really into Wild at Heart. It was very much like an exciting, this is what it means to truly be a man of God. Yeah. And I actually tried to, in college a lot, figure that problem out, because I was a leader in the college ministry. It's called the Navigators. Yeah. And we were just dominated by women all the time. And I was like, as a leader, my biggest puzzle, like, man, how do we get more guys to show up? And I tried everything, tried man days where the guys would go out and, play tough sports, or a guy's camping trip, or, right. Kind of similar thing. Like, let's do some manly things and then ruin it by making it about God. Yeah. I remember once we watched Black Hawk Down. This was kind of a sour moment for me. I was like, we invited a bunch of like believers and non-believers, just hang out, play dodgeball, eat some steak, and then watch Black Hawk Down because it's just an exciting movie. Mm-hmm. And then at the very end, some of the guys who lead the ministry stand up and start trying to like make it about the gospel. And I was so embarrassed. I was just like, guys, this movie has nothing to do with Jesus. Can we please just enjoy a good action movie? Yeah, well, they were trying to, maybe, since they knew unbelievers were there, they were trying to make an analogy or something. Yeah, it just wasn't working. It was. So one thing about the Navigators that they did well that I adopted was scripture memory. Oh, yeah. Little books. I have books of the Bible memorized. Wow. Whole books? Colossians and James, and I was working my way through First John. Yeah. The little, you probably remember the TMS, the topical memory system. Yeah, the little books with cards. Yep. Yeah, I got that. Yeah, they did that super well. Yeah, and I learned a lot of them. Yeah. Used to spend a lot of time alone, and I would take walks, and I would recite those and go over them, over and over. You got to hide the scripture in your heart. Exactly. And you know what? There was something powerful about it. And I know this would probably be true in hindsight. I think we could say that if I just took like a Mark Twain quote or a Nietzsche or, something that was grounding, or even poetry, like, right. And you hid those things in your heart and you were able to pull them out every now and then, it'd still be beneficial. Maybe that's what I was feeling. I don't know. Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was definitely a sense, especially with the topical memory system, like you memorize a set of verses on anger, and then you're angry, and this verse pops into your head about how that's going to destroy relationships. Like stuff from Proverbs, still has, absolutely some wisdom in it. And so. Well, Ecclesiastes is a smart book. Yeah, I think so. I think Solomon was smart, especially how much he got laid. I know. It's a shame he gave that up. Okay, so we're up to, I think it's fascinating that you met Nathan Keith like 10 years ago. Yeah, we were actually really good friends. He's a good guy. Especially through deconverting. Honestly, that show remains to be one of the best shows and one of the most downloaded shows ever. He's just a really, really good guy. Yeah, it's really funny. When I first became a believer, he was very influential to me in like worship, because he was a worship pastor or worship leader for our youth group. Yeah. And he was super passionate about it. And it just kind of like taught me how to be passionate in worship. He had led this Bible study when I was in high school for college students. And me and him were always like the question askers, the ones always like going deeper or like not satisfied with like the simple answer. And we would always be talking about this stuff. And then, years later, I find out. So I kind of like got the timeline when I listened to his podcast, but he deconverted right when I like was going through a struggle of faith and just had a resurgence, kind of like had my faith bolstered. So we had been talking about it. We were talking about inerrancy. And I remember thinking like, man, we're on the same page. Like we had the same struggles for the past year or so, but kind of seems like we're rounding out, coming through to the other side. This is cool. Like me and Nathan still after all these years.
Yeah.
Then I found out like a couple weeks later from someone else, like, oh yeah, Nathan's an atheist now. And I'm like, what? Can't be him. Like that shook me. I was just like, this can't be happening. So we talked about it and I totally understood where he was coming from. And then, when I deconverted, he was the first person that I reached out to just to get some grounding. Yeah.
Wow. So going back to him being a worship leader, I mean, I get this picture in my mind of him on stage. You're in the audience. I mean, it's the type of thing where your eyes are closed and your hands are raised, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Some intense grab hold of the garment and touch the hem of his garment and touch the power and
right.
Oh,
kneeling, praying
prostrate.
Over people.
Yeah. Did you ever pray in tongues?
No, I was never. I was very much like a only certain people have tongues, and if you just try to like activate it, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah,
type of,
which is true.
Yeah,
I think. I mean, that's better than just fake it till you make it.
Yeah, I've known one friend who believed he had the gift in tongues, but he only ever did it by himself.
Yeah,
he was very like humble about it.
Well, if you're going to do it, that'd be the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess what were the we talked about? You mentioned inerrancy, and just kind of realizing there's a lot of mistakes here. It's written by fallible human beings. Why do we need for it to be infallible?
It's a good question. I think the church presents that because it's a functional belief, right? Like if you have a book that is the epitome of God's revelation and there's no error about it, then they can always use that to justify their course of action.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a book that could or could not be what God said, or maybe this means what you think it means, or maybe it doesn't, then you get a lot of wiggle room and people, going their own way and not actually falling in line with your personal revelation of God.
Yeah. I heard a sermon once where a guy was, I wish I could iterate it better, but it's basically just imagine a giant room and there's a stake in the middle of the room. And we use that stake to orient ourselves wherever we are in the room. So we're 2 paces south, 6 paces east of the ground zero, the marker. That gives us a bearing as to where we are in the room. And without that, nobody can really make a claim as to where they are in the room unless you have something to measure against it, I guess, or something. Make sense?
Right.
And this was the point is that without the Bible, we don't really know where we are in relation to God, in relation to morality or truth. And so if you don't have, and this is what I'm going with inerrancy, if that stake in the middle of the room has wheels on it, then we're fucked.
Right.
It needs to be reliable. It needs to be solid. And then we know where we stand. And that was a comforting thing.
Yeah. And that's actually what became like a big problem for me in my faith journey. I started to, so as far as me connecting with God, high school was definitely the best time. Mm-hmm. And in hindsight, I believe it was just because I had great friends and it was all one, collective emotional experience that I sort of attributed to God. Mm-hmm. But when I went to college, I really had a hard time recapturing, deep friendships. And I went through this phase where I felt like I couldn't connect to God emotionally. That's what I was always, saying people I was wrestling with. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I turned to theology. I turned to apologetics, and that kind of, got my interest for a while. But the more I studied it, the more I realized, kind of like you're saying, like without this Bible, we don't have anything on God. Like everything that we know about, everything that we talk about, believe about comes from this book, which happened to be written thousands of years ago in a different language, in a really primitive culture. Mm-hmm. And it's full of just questions and errors and it's being debated all the time. Mm-hmm. And that became like a very I guess, the thorn that would always be there no matter where I was in my spiritual journey. Like, without the Bible, what do I actually have of God? And the answer was nothing.
Well, all the more reason to hold it, keep it close, you know, even idolize it. I think a lot of Western evangelicals have idolized the Bible. I mean, it almost is their God.
It is. I mean, that's all you have of it. And I always had trouble with, like, you know, we'd be talking things like inerrancy or what have you, and someone would be like, ultimately, the main thing that matters is my relationship with Jesus and not whether or not the Bible's inerrant. Yeah. And in my mind, I'd be like, well, you wouldn't know a thing about Jesus if it wasn't for the Bible. So
it's circular.
I don't see how we can just say that Jesus is all that matters, because this is, you know, the only source text we have on the guy.
Yeah. One thing that used to bother me, and I think it's a psalm, that thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path, right?
Right.
So the guy that wrote that, which I think is King David or somebody in the Old Testament, the guy that wrote that is not talking about the Bible. The Bible hadn't even been written yet. The New Testament hadn't even been written yet. So when people say the Bible is a light unto my path because the scriptures say so, no, that's not what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, in the John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word. And so I used to get mad at Christians and friends and peers who just made a big deal out of the Bible, because I felt like they were putting the Bible above Jesus when, in fact, Jesus was the Logos, not the Bible.
Right.
So, like you said, you were trying to stick to Jesus, but then the cart was before the horse, or which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Right.
And it's a mind fuck. So I guess whenever you were in that high school and you're zealous and you're starting to move into some serious radical devotion, and did you by chance like give up secular music and devote yourself to Christian music?
I did, interestingly enough, have this one moment where I deleted like all of my music. And I was like, this is all just, none of it glorifies God.
Right.
I literally only listened to, my dad listened to a lot of jazz growing up. So I downloaded all of his jazz music because there's no words. So I was like, this is fine.
Yeah.
And then I listened to my mom. She, you know, worked for a symphony for a time. So she was really into classical music. So I had this really brief stint where that was all I listened to. And then I sort of got into just, you know, like worship music. And college, I got into a lot of like Christian folk bands, which are actually, like, some of them I still listen to because they're just pretty good.
Like who?
Some, so the more on the nose Christian ones would be ones like the Grey Havens.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, they were up and coming when I first started school, and I really loved their music because it was all metaphors. So, I mean, you're familiar with worship music; it's all pretty similar. Yeah. After a while, it's like the same four chords and what have you. But they were, you know, these really creative songs that had kind of gospel metaphors in the background. So I really enjoyed that. Other bands are just kind of folk bands that the members are Christians. So sometimes there's themes, sometimes there's not, like Penny and Sparrow or the Oh Hellos.
See, I figured the Oh Hellos were Christian because there's somebody showed me a song. Not only do they sound Christian, but there's that song, Wormwood.
Dear Wormwood.
Yeah. And he's talking about probably Satan or something, but I mean, it's just lies.
Right.
And there's a voice in your head telling you're a failure or whatever. And I know who you are and I know who I am now. And it's a powerful song.
Yeah. That whole album is really beautiful. Essentially, it's like each song is kind of a letter to this Wormwood character.
Yeah.
And it's the same, like, you can take the spirituality aside and it's just a song about, or a series of songs about realizing you're in a bad relationship that's harmful to you. And, you know, now you see the truth and you're moving on.
Yeah.
And I used to look at that as, you know, it's the devil and Satan and stuff. But even after I deconverted, I was like, no, this is actually how I feel about God.
Yeah. Yeah. Or just lies in general.
Right.
And if God is a lie, then it's not God we're trying to break up with. It's lies.
Right.
Because God doesn't exist.
It's true.
It's the vapor, or the mythology, or the projection that human beings have made. So let's talk about your love life. When did you meet your wife?
Yeah, so in the Navigators in school is where we met. I was probably at the peak of my passion and zealous Jesus pursuit, and she had actually just become a believer. And so we met. I got this big crush on her, but at the time I had these really strict rules on like boundaries and dating. So I essentially liked her, but I spent 5 months praying about whether or not it was God's will for me to ask her to be my girlfriend. I eventually came to the conclusion that God was saying, yes, go for it. So I asked her out. We started dating 2013. We got engaged right as she was graduating. She graduated, she's a year older than me, so she graduated May of 2015. And then we got married August 2015. Nathan Keith actually played the music at my wedding.
Gosh.
And then, we married, just living life together, and things were good. But I managed to, things were complicated as there would be with any marriage. And I think my deconversion sort of rocked the boat quite a bit for both of us. And then just a lot for me, to the point where I ended up, through some counseling and talks with friends and family, deciding that it was best if we part ways. So,
yeah. And so how long were you married?
About 2.5 years.
Okay. No kids.
No kids. No.
Yeah.
And that was part of another reason. I mean, when we first got married, we were both super passionate and wanted to do things like be missionaries and, just live this very devout life for God. And when I deconverted, everything, my whole identity was wrapped up in this, right? Which I'm sure, a lot of people understand. So I had no sense of self.
Yep.
And everything everything that I wanted was gone.
Yep.
I got to a place where I didn't even want kids anymore. Like, I wasn't sure about that. And I just kind of realized that our life together would be an uphill battle, even if we got through the immediate difficulties, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, you know her best. And
so
those dynamics and those nuances are unique to every fucking relationship. Any two people, there's no two relationships the same. So only you know the nuance of how hard it was going to be to go forward with her. When you parted, it's always going to be painful. There's no way to do this without it really hurting. But it can be done without anger or animosity or contempt.
There's definitely no animosity. We're still friends.
That's
I
good.
think it was just really, really fucking sad, to be totally honest.
Sure.
It was very much, I was falling out of love with her, and also just I'm lost, I have no sense of direction in my life.
And she wasn't falling out of love with you. She wanted to stay.
No.
Okay.
She wanted to stay together. She wanted to be there for me during this time, which made it even harder. Yeah. I broke my best friend's heart, and it sucked because I thought it was for the best. And I spent a lot of time hoping she would come around and see it the same way. But one talk with my dad, I remember he just told me you have to be willing to be the bad guy. You can't wait around for this to get easier, because it's only going to get harder if you drag it out.
Yeah. So you don't have any regrets?
Nope. It's,
okay.
I think that, I made the right decision. We didn't have kids, and we're still very young, both of us. So
do you know if she's moved on, another relationship?
No, not as of yet. Not right now. We talked. We had a dog together. That's probably the closest thing.
Okay, so it's pretty recent.
Yeah. So she's. Actually, my divorce became officially final this past week.
Oh wow, that is fresh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm sorry. Here I am asking if she's moved on. I didn't know.
No worries.
I was thinking it was a couple of years ago or something. No.
No. This is pretty.
Oh yeah.
Hot off the press.
Oh man.
But no regrets. I think that one of the things I struggled with a lot was guilt. I looked into it, and divorce guilt is a thing. The person who initiates will often feel guilty regardless of the reason. So
how fresh is your deconversion then?
September of last year is when I officially was I don't believe anymore. As far as the entire process, it was just a grueling year and a half long up to September. And then September was fuck all of this. I'm tired of this.
Yeah. So there was a long time between when Nathan did it and when you did it, over a year.
Yeah. Basically what happened with me and Nathan was we both had a year overlap where we were struggling with a lot of the same things. Mm-hmm. And then he had his moments where he was okay, I just don't believe anymore. And in that time, I had a singular moment that I felt was a sign from God to keep going.
Okay.
And that literally lasted about a year.
Okay, that was enough to keep you going for a while.
Yeah. And it kept me searching. I was only happy for like 10 seconds of it, but at least, I think one of the reasons that Christianity survives is it has this like self-defensive kind of virus like theology where it's like all of your struggles are just a sign that, God's teaching you something. So you can ignore a lot of your problems because it's, God's lesson or it's God's plan for you to be going through this hard time. Yeah. Like I heard that from a friend recently and it just made me cringe. I was like, I remember when I used to think like that. Well,
that's what I was thinking earlier when you were struggling. And then, cause I think you went from, there's just a phase where, it was when you left high school, went to college and you didn't have as many friends and you kind of felt adrift and God might have been distant. And the way that you frame that is, this is me, God taking me to another level. He chastises those he loves.
Right.
You can, like your friend did, you can frame it as this is God, what is it, tightening the screws or some metaphor.
Yeah.
So in your transition, did you kind of maybe latch on to some of these more progressive, marginal Christian things like Rob Bell or like the podcast The Liturgist with Michael Gungor and Science Mike? Did any of that happen?
No, like I mentioned earlier, I'm such an extremist that I basically, as a believer, I couldn't stand Rob Bell or anyone who was slightly less Christian than me. Yeah. So when it got to the point where I thought this might not be true, I was like, I don't fuck Christianity light. I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
Like, either it's true or it's not true. I'm not going to waste my time with, anything else.
So there is that hot and cold thing for you in black and white. It's just,
yeah. It's pretty bad.
Well, and we've recently had a guy on the show. I can't remember. There's been a few that kind of had this theme, and they were the type of thinker that once they found a hole, like once the Bible was wrong in one area, because they had put so much gravitas in the inerrancy, then it just was like, boom, it's over.
Yep. That's essentially how it went for me. I remember, so the end of my spiritual journey was, what I did was I wrote an essay on whether or not there was valid historical evidence for the resurrection. Mm-hmm. my statement was essentially, Christianity is difficult to believe in. There's a lot of struggles, but if we can believe in the resurrection, we have something to go off of, right?
Yeah.
And so I sent it out to all my believer friends, and I was like, this is where I'm at. I don't think that any of these historical points are valid enough for the degree of faith that the Bible's asking me for.
There you go.
And so what are your thoughts? And like not a single one of them would actually try to provide enough evidence for the resurrection. Every response was essentially some variation of,
you gotta have
agree,
faith.
We can't prove the resurrection, but you have to have faith, and this is why I have faith.
Mm-hmm.
And they would all give me this story happened to me, or this thing in my life I can't explain. And I was like, all right, you know what? Without even getting into arguing why your stories don't prove that there's a God, God has not done any of that for me. That was a really frustrating thing for me. It's like everyone has their personal
anecdote,
but on my side, I've got nothing. So clearly, this God is not interested in me remaining a believer.
It is hard to hear about these little special gifts that God's given everybody else.
I know. Like,
what about
the middle child in me?
Yeah. So how's it going with your family now? I mean, like how much have you rocked the boat by, or how much do they know?
They know everything.
Okay.
Initially, I didn't tell them because I didn't have the emotional energy for it, but I tweeted something very anti-religious because I have like 3 Twitter followers. So that's where I go to vent my rage without anyone actually noticing. But one of those followers ended up being my mom. I forgot that she was on Twitter. So she had screenshotted it and she was like, this was interesting. So I sent her my essay, which after a while it evolved into my deconversion essay, essentially.
Yeah.
It details the debate and then why I wasn't convinced and all that. And the interesting thing was, like I mentioned earlier, my parents were very devout growing up, but they more or less, they don't go to church anymore. They still consider themselves believers, but they're very much laid back with it. So it didn't really cause a lot of tension. Mm-hmm. And everyone in my family has said that they enjoy being around me more now.
Oh, that's great. That happens a lot because the more devout you are, like you said, the self-righteousness, and you can kind of become an asshole. Not kind of. You can definitely become an asshole.
A straight-up asshole in the name of God.
Yeah, it happens a lot. People are like, oh, you're really much more fun to be around and much less judgmental and more kind and more real.
Yep.
More open. Because this is where I'm going with that room metaphor where there's a ground zero, this pole in the middle. I think, like my wife and I just got back from Barcelona.
Oh, nice.
And it ended up, we hadn't been out of the country overseas, at least, in 20 years. And so this was like her 50th birthday, our 30-year anniversary. And we really kind of needed something. Life is hard at midlife. I mean, there's empty nest, there's menopause, and actually deconversion is a big part of the stress and anxiety and identity crisis that no matter what age it happens, it's like the bottom falls out, or as others have mentioned, it's like you realize your mother never existed, or something. It can be devastating. So we just were like, I got to do something. And so I bought 2 tickets to Barcelona, and I've got some reasons why I chose it, but it was really almost like throwing a dart at the map.
Right.
But one of the things that I think it ended up being a really magical time. But one of the things is in our house, in our cities, in our cars, in our stereos, I mean, like in our everything that is just our routine life is almost a hypnotic autopilot, go through the motions day in and day out. And so getting out into an environment and culture and continent that is just nowhere close to your routine. So the thing about being there is we got 4 full days to be there, which is like, we've got to capitalize on this time. So time's of the essence. Get out of bed. Let's carpe diem a little bit. And,
right.
And so there's this urgency. And when you walk out of the door of your Airbnb, you don't know, you're totally disoriented. So you're forced to be present, to be aware, to be engaged, as opposed to the routine of your old home back life.
Right.
Your life back home. So I guess what happened is that which we had based our life on, the normalcy of our life routines, was gone. So I compare it to like that pole in the middle of the room is gone.
Right.
Because in a way, I mean, we know that north, south, east, and west is a human construct. And it gives us a sense of, what we are. But we live on a round orb.
Right.
So there is no east and west, that's all just man-made. And I think one of the things that is kind of typical of Christianity is it gives us a false security. And one of the things that we have to detox from is that security blanket. Then enter the naturalist world where it's chaos, it's science, it's just random. There is no God running the shop. The universe is just free fall or whatever. And so that's scary, but it can turn into something to where you're a much more present and engaging person.
Right. I definitely agree with that. I think one of the biggest fears I had leading up to deconversion was the idea of there being nothing was just terrifying to me.
Yeah.
I'm very much of the mindset that I would have done great in the military. Like if I have orders, I will follow them to the T, no questions asked. I'll give it my all. And when I don't, I sort of freak out and wonder, what's the purpose? How am I going to orient myself? But I remember having this moment where I realized that sort of the phrase that came to mind was that nothing is okay. And it was like a little double entendre, right? Because on the one hand, nothing feels like it's going okay most of the time in life. But on the other hand, the idea of nothing is actually okay. Like it's fine if there is no design or plan or master over all our lives. It's okay that there's an empty canvas. That to me became very freeing because I realized I can decide what I want to do and that just be the end of it. I don't have to have it be told. I don't have to discover it. That's probably the most exhausting thing when you're told that there is a plan and you have to figure out what it is and figure out how to do it right.
Well, you sound like the kind of guy also that would empty yourself at the cross.
Yes.
And just say, Lord, fill me. And I forfeit my agendas to yours. I empty myself, fill me, et cetera, so that when you come out of that, I know that a lot of people, and I myself included, and some of those nearest and dearest to me, have said, I had to start all over figuring out and asking myself, what do I want? Because I had so emptied out my own thoughts and feelings and desires and dreams that I was like, who am I and what do I want? Did you have any of that?
Oh, absolutely. So we talked about how I exercise a lot. There was a year in college where I gave up weightlifting for God. I felt like he was calling me out of the gym.
Because it was an idol.
It was an idol. And I remember being in the gym so the story goes, I was reading my Bible more. One week I got sick, so I took a week off of lifting to recover, right? And then I go back to lifting weights. And there's this moment in the gym where I'm curling and I hear that little voice in my head that's like, you could be reading the Bible right now.
Right.
And I felt like that was a conviction from God to tell me to stop lifting weights. And so I did, which in hindsight sucked because I just lost a lot of progress. But yeah, I very much have that personality. And actually, so I'm currently seeing a therapist to help work through a lot of this stuff. And one of the things that I've discovered is that I have symptoms for what is known as borderline personality disorder.
Okay.
It manifests a lot in people who have struggles with identity. Mm-hmm. And my whole life, identity has been a huge struggle. I've always felt like I've identified myself in terms of other people. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of ways, it was almost a survival instinct, right? To fit into a group, I would become just like the group. Mm-hmm. And even more so than that, I would become the best of whatever that group was.
Right.
And whenever that group was gone, I was gone. So before Christianity, it was all these different types of friends, like playing football or video games or doing drugs or what have you. And then when it was Christianity, it became this like just really debilitating pursuit of Jesus where I mean, you have a doctrine that tells you to lose your identity in pursuit of being like Jesus. So when I left it all, I really just had an identity crisis that I was crippled by. I couldn't make it through life. There were days where I'm just like laying on the floor, looking up, thinking like, what am I going to do? Who am I? You know, what's the point of all this? And therapy has been extremely helpful. Like,
oh yeah,
more so than, any Christian counseling or anything like that I'd experienced before. Just seeing a secular therapist who's trained in the human mind.
Yep.
She actually specializes in BPD, which has been very helpful. I walk away from each session just, with a lot of hope and encouragement to just enjoy a normal life and keep working through these issues.
Oh, it's fantastic. Fantastic. I'm a huge proponent of therapy, lifelong therapy. I mean, working out our shit is a lifelong work, and it's a good work.
Yeah.
Because like absolutely. You said, it's a blank palette, and we can write our own story.
Got it.
So you mentioned drugs. What kind of drugs have you taken?
Not very much. I smoked a lot of weed in high school, though, during my rebellious phase. Uh-huh. Me and my friends would essentially go sit in like this sewer drain area and just get super high and eat a ton of food.
Get munchies.
Yeah. I started, so that was actually right before my high school Christianity began. I had these two best friends that we would hang out all the time. We'd make movies together, put them on YouTube. That was kind of back when that was really popular to do. And then we just became these potheads. And I stopped hanging out with them because they started getting into some, I guess at the time felt like scary shit, like stealing pain pills and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And my parents embedded in me a very strong fear of the police as a young black man. So as soon as they started getting into that stuff, I was like, all right, guys, I'm out.
Were they black?
No, we're not. No, they were just two white kids that I would hang out with.
So they had the advantage of being able to get caught with drugs in a car and not shot.
Yep, exactly. And so
okay,
I was at least smart enough to avoid that.
And so when you became a Christian, you were even less friends with them, right? I mean,
yes. Essentially, I started going to church, and my friends were all my church friends. And, every non-believer was an outreach project at that point, not an actual person. Yeah. Unfortunately.
So post-Christianity, have you considered revisiting marijuana in your life?
I definitely have. It's been a very... I remember the first time was that I was still married, and it was a bit contentious, but me and my wife went to a Renaissance festival with a bunch of her old high school buddies, and I don't know if you've ever been to one,
Yeah,
but essentially
for sure.
most of what you do is get drunk at the campsites.
Yeah.
And someone had some weed and it was offered to me and I did not turn it down, and it started a big fight.
A fight with your wife?
Yeah, she was not happy.
Yeah.
But I was, because I was high.
All right, so man, you seem to be coping well, and you're learning about yourself. Are you a reader? Like, you read books on a regular basis?
I try to. So one of the things I do struggle with anxiety, and an interesting way that manifests is if I feel like I have too much going on in my head, I don't let myself do some things that I enjoy. So like I read books, I listen to podcasts, and I also read comic books.
Yeah.
But for some reason, when I'm stressed, like I can't do those things. So I was in the middle of a really interesting book called Guns, Germs, and Steel.
Okay.
It's essentially a book that looks at the history of all humanity and traces why certain civilizations and cultures rose up to power and why others didn't. Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting read. I did do the tradition. I felt like I had to listen to Christopher Hitchens'
God Is Not Great?
God Is Not Great. Yep. I had to listen to that on audiobook, of course.
Yeah. Life changer, man. I love that book.
Yeah. That was really good. So yeah, I read when I can, but.
So you get overwhelmed at times, and when you do, you let those things which are your own personal likes and recreations go to the wayside?
Yeah.
I would think you would double down on those.
Well, I have other things I double down on, and it's mostly exercise.
Okay,
it just like releases endorphins, and
it really does. Yeah, my wife's a
makes
runner.
me feel better.
She swears by it. Yeah,
but yeah, I get this. Definitely something I want to work through in therapy. I just get in this weird place where I feel like I can't enjoy this because I feel like I have too much going on, and so I haven't actually picked up a book in a couple of months.
So you live alone?
Yep.
Is that an adjustment?
It was at first, but I think I'm getting used to it. I very much have like a on and off loner personality where there are times where I just want to be alone and like don't interact with very many people, and I think I'm definitely in one of those times. So
yeah, like this weekend, my wife's out with friends. She went on a road trip with some girlfriends, and my children that are normally at least around, they don't all live here. They're all at Bonnaroo right now. So
nice.
I've had the house to myself all weekend, and I have loved it. But I also get the sense that there's probably a shelf life on this enjoyment. I would get to a point where I was like, I would really miss people, especially these people.
Yeah, definitely.
But there's what about like TV or movie binging, or like is there something on Netflix that you watch regularly?
I watched Rick and Morty right when I deconverted. My boss and I were pretty good friends outside of work, and he was always recommending it, and that show was really funny and just like really kind of helped me take some of the religious stuff a little bit more lightly.
Yeah.
So I watched that. I just finished a show called Easy on Netflix. Not sure if you heard of it. It's very interesting, actually. It's essentially just each episode is about a different set of characters in Chicago, and they go through just, different random little experiences. But the show creates a lot of tension, which kind of draws me in.
I think I may have watched one of those. I can't remember, but it does ring a bell, especially the fact that every episode is different people.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of it has to do with sex, but like in a very kind of human experience way, like not like, your typical Hollywood, like, oh, everyone's having sex and it's great, but just like
a smarter way.
Yeah. Which has been interesting for me, as I sort of am learning about, the real world and not just living inside the Christian bubble.
Sexual healing is a big part of people's deconversion.
Yeah, it's a tough part for sure. But
so when you were with your girlfriend before she was with your wife, did you guys abstain?
Yeah, we did. We did our best. Came close in a lot of ways. Because that amount of repression is just not natural as I now see it.
Yeah.
But we never had sex or anything like that.
My wife and I, when we were premarital, we did eventually give up and do it, but because we were dated for almost 5 years, so that's impossible.
Oh, yeah.
But
it's just not even.
In those early stages when we were trying not to have sex, there was one time we were, I guess for lack of a better word, it was a dry grind. So we both still have our jeans on, but we're like rubbing everything.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely been there.
Yeah, yeah. I actually came in my pants.
It's so uncomfortable.
Yeah, but when you're that young and you're that fertile or whatever,
it happens.
Yeah, it was a mess.
Yeah, I look back on that, especially after deconverting. I was just like, that was so stupid.
Stupid, silly.
Having sex, enjoying it, not feeling guilty.
Yeah.
But
all right, man. Well, let's see. We've talked. What do you still listen to some of those old folky Christian bands? I guess was there anything else?
The main one I listen to is Penny and Sparrow. Listen to a lot of Corey Kilgannon.
Okay.
There was one song that, like, a lot of his songs helped me in deconversion and even divorce later. But the biggest one is called Ghost 2. Mm-hmm. And it's there's this line. It's like if finding you means I lose what's important to me, then I guess I'm giving up on the man that I was trying to be.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like a good way to sum up my experience, right? Like, I realized at a certain point that if I was going to find God the way all my friends were, I would have to sacrifice some key values to me, which the biggest one is just living according to the truth. Yeah. And, living in reality and not, my own desire and perception of it. 'Cause if finding you means that I lose what's important to me, I guess that I'm giving up on the man I spent sleepless nights desperately hoping to be. I only wanted to dream someday to die in peace. But I'm actually trying to find new music because, a lot of what I listen to is either from my Christian days or from my married days. And I'm looking into, branching out my music tastes and also building some new experiences. So if you got any suggestions.
Well, after I listen to these, and if it rings a bell or reminds me of anything, I'll think about it. What do you drive?
I drive my dad's 1999 Toyota Camry.
That's actually a good year for the Camry. I had one.
Oh, yeah. It's stick shift, still going.
How many miles?
Oh, geez. It's over 200,000.
Yeah. Figured that old.
Yep.
What about pet peeves? You got any pet peeves?
Pet peeves. Let's see. People don't chew their food with their mouth closed. Got that one from my mom. And when I get into arguments with people, I can't stand when people use circular reasoning.
Yeah.
That bugs the crap out of me. I'm off Facebook now because I just got so tired of people essentially referencing their belief to substantiate their belief.
Referencing their belief to substantiate their belief. I love it.
I know. It's exhausting.
Yeah. Well, I did notice you went off because I was trying to find you and you weren't to be found. So.
No, yeah. I made a separate profile just to be a part of the support group, but you ended up.
Yeah, and I could add you back in there. I don't think you're in there right now.
I think I am.
Okay.
I still get the notifications for it.
Okay, cool.
See what people are going through.
I haven't mentioned your name yet on the show. How are we doing that?
Oh, you can use my real name. It's fine.
Okay. So, Devin Andre Woodard?
Yep. Andre is my dad's name.
Cool.
It's a family tradition would have been, I guess, if I would have a son, maybe give him my middle name. That's maybe the vision there, but
yeah,
we'll see if kids ever come back on my radar at some point.
So your family, like your parents and siblings, live in the Austin area, or how far away are you?
My sister lives in Leander, which is about 20 minutes outside of Austin, and then everyone else lives in San Antonio, which is about 2 hours. So
okay,
we get to see each other pretty often.
Yeah, especially
my sister. We're very close. I'm up there at least once a week, helping babysit. She's got 4 kids.
Okay.
All 5, 4, 1, and 2 months old, I think.
So what kind of uncle is Uncle Devin?
Uncle Devin is the fun uncle that lets us do whatever we want. and it is.
I can see that.
I'm quite good at it.
All right. So I really, I've enjoyed talking to you. Are you good with the talk?
Yeah, I think so. Hopefully I didn't ramble on too much.
Oh, it was perfect. I thought it was great. And I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So that's my talk with Devin Andre Woodard. I got to tell you, I loved it. I loved meeting him, talking to him. And it got a really slow start, mostly because I was hungover and waking up. But I'm telling you, by the end, it really had traction, and we could have gone on and on, probably. But he's not very accessible. If you want to write him, you can write me, midgley.cass@gmail.com, midgley.cass, and I will forward your message to him. My thanks to Devin for coming on the show. Thank you for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is.
I'm not gonna hurt you or cry in your arms, insensibly argue, slam the door to your car. I only get under your skin, eager to excavate what lies within. The habits of our bedroom, your retrograde charm. One flesh becomes two when you harbor your guard. Leave the lights on when we're alone. Why don't we keep the front door closed? 'Cause if finding you means that I lose what's important to me, I guess that I'm giving up on the man I spent sleepless nights desperately hoping to be. I only wanted to dream someday to die in peace. I'm not gonna use you as some pale overdose. Sunlight you'll see through, but the moon is your ghost. Shimmering reflections on your teeth, counterfeit stars that we both strain to see. So if finding you means that I lose what's important premonitions unknown. It's not that I love you, I just hate me alone.